The November wind cut through Chicago's south side like broken glass, carrying with it the smell of Lake Michigan and the promise of an early winter. Elena Martinez pulled her worn coat tighter as she wiped down the last booth at Rosie's Diner, her reflection barely visible in the rain-streaked windows. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the darkness of 10 p.m., casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. "You heading out, honey?" called Rosie from behind the counter, her voice raspy from 40 years of cigarettes she'd finally quit last spring. The older woman was counting the register, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency through bills and coins. Elena glanced at the clock, a vintage Coca-Cola piece that had hung on that wall since before she was born. "Just finishing up the last section. I'll take out the trash before I lock up." Rosie looked up, concern creasing her already lined face. "You sure? It's dark out there in this neighborhood. I've done it 100 times, Rosie. I'll be fine." Elena managed a tired smile. She appreciated the concern, but after 6 years working double shifts at this diner, the routine was as familiar as breathing. Besides, she needed every hour of work she could get. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $200 short. "All right, but you call me when you get home, understand?" Rosie grabbed her purse from under the counter. "I mean it, Elena. My phone stays on." "I will. Promise." Elena watched as Rosie headed for the front door, keys jangling in her hand. The older woman had been more than a boss over the years, more like the mother Elena had lost when she was 16. A car accident on the I-90. Black ice. Gone in an instant. That was 9 years ago, but some wounds never fully closed. The bell above the door chimed as Rosie left, and suddenly the diner felt cavernous. Elena stood in the middle of the checkered floor, surrounded by empty red vinyl booths and silent chrome fixtures. The old jukebox in the corner sat dark and quiet. During the day, this place buzzed with life. Factory workers grabbing breakfast, families sharing weekend pancakes, late-night truckers nursing endless coffee. But now, in these still moments after closing, Elena could hear everything. The hum of the refrigerators, the tick of the clock, the settling sounds of an old building breathing. She gathered the trash bags from behind the counter, one from the kitchen, heavy with food scraps and cooking waste, and one from the dining area, lighter but bulkier with paper and plastic. The back door groaned on its hinges as she pushed it open with her hip, stepping into the alley that ran behind the row of businesses on this street. The cold hit her immediately, stealing her breath. November in Chicago didn't mess around. Elena blinked against the wind, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The alley was lit by a single security light mounted above the dumpster, its yellow glow creating more shadows than illumination. Graffiti covered the brick walls on both sides. Not the artistic kind, just tags and territorial markings that changed every few months. She'd walked this alley hundreds of times, but tonight something felt different. The air carried a tension she couldn't name, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Elena shook her head, dismissing the feeling. She was just tired, that was all. 16-hour days did that to a person. The dumpster sat against the back wall, its green metal surface dented and scratched from years of use. Elena approached it, already reaching for the lid, when she heard it, a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, the rustle of paper, movement. She froze, her hand on the cold metal of the dumpster. Rats were common in Chicago alleys, but this sounded bigger. Her heart began to beat faster, adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, swallowed quickly by the wind. The movement stopped. Elena stood perfectly still, every sense heightened. She should go back inside, lock the door, call someone. That's what any sensible person would do. But curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, kept her feet planted. She'd dealt with raccoons before, even a stray dog once. Whatever this was, she could handle it. She took a step closer to the dumpster, then another. The security light flickered, and in that brief moment of clarity, she saw him. A man. Not beside the dumpster, inside it. Elena gasped, stumbling backward, the trash bags falling from her hands. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. A grown man, wedged into the dumpster among the garbage, his hands clutching what looked like a half-eaten sandwich from today's lunch rush. His face was turned toward her, eyes wide with the same shock she felt. For a heartbeat, they both froze, predator and prey, though Elena couldn't tell which was which. Then he moved, trying to pull himself out of the dumpster, and that's when Elena saw the blood. His white shirt, once expensive by the look of it, was torn and stained dark. His face bore cuts and bruises, swelling around his left eye. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the dumpster, and when he tried to stand, his leg buckled beneath him. "Please." His voice was rough, desperate. "Please don't scream." Elena's breath came in short gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back inside, to call the police. This man was clearly in trouble, and trouble wasn't something she could afford in her life. She had enough of her own problems without inheriting someone else's. But she didn't run. Maybe it was the way he said please, not as a threat, but as a genuine plea. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, dark brown and exhausted, that spoke of someone who'd been running for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. Maybe it was because she recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror after her parents died, when she'd had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "Are you—" she started, her voice trembling. "Do you need help?" He stared at her, seeming to weigh whether to answer. Blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow, tracking down the side of his face. He was shivering, she realized, and not just from fear. The temperature had dropped into the 30s, and his jacket, what remained of it, offered little protection. "I need—" he started, then stopped, as if unsure what he actually needed. His eyes darted past her to the mouth of the alley, checking for threats. "I need to disappear." Elena should have walked away right then. Those words, "I need to disappear," they weren't the words of someone with simple problems. They were the words of someone running from something serious, something dangerous. "Who's after you?" she heard herself ask, surprising herself with the question. He laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "Everyone." He tried again to climb out of the dumpster, wincing with each movement. His right hand clutched his left side where his shirt was darkest with blood. Elena made a decision that would change everything. She stepped forward, extending her hand. "Here, let me help you." He looked at her hand like it was a foreign object, something he couldn't quite comprehend. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "No," Elena agreed, her hand still extended. "But I know what it's like to be hungry and hurt with nowhere to go." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief that anyone could look at him in this moment and offer kindness instead of judgment. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was strong despite his condition, and together they managed to get him out of the dumpster. He stood unsteadily, favoring his right leg, and Elena could see the full extent of his injuries. Besides the obvious cuts and bruises on his face, his shirt was torn open, revealing more bruising across his ribs. His expensive-looking pants were ripped at the knee, and one of his shoes was missing entirely. He was tall, she realized, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that had probably been neat once but now hung disheveled across his forehead. Despite the blood and bruising, she could see he was youngish, early 30s at most, with the kind of features that spoke of someone who was usually in control, usually commanding respect. The contrast between what he must have been and what he was now, standing in an alley eating from garbage, was jarring. "When did you last eat?" Elena asked quietly. "Real food, I mean." He thought about it, his brow furrowing as if the effort of remembering was too much. 2 days? 3? "I don't—" He swayed slightly and Elena instinctively reached out to steady him. "Okay," she said, making another decision that would have made Rosie lecture her for hours. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Why?" Elena glanced toward the back door of the diner, then back at him. The wind picked up again and she watched him shiver violently. Whatever this man had done, whatever he was running from, he was human. He was cold and hurt and hungry, and she had the power to do something about that. "Come in," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. "Dinner's still warm." He stared at her, and for a moment, she thought he might refuse, might disappear back into the shadows and leave her standing there, hand extended into empty air. But then his shoulders sagged, the weight of whatever he'd been carrying finally too much. "You're serious," he said, not quite a question. "The door's right there. I can get you food, clean up those cuts. No strings attached." Elena paused, then added, "But if you're going to hurt me, please just say so now and save us both the trouble." That bitter laugh again. "Lady, I couldn't hurt a fly right now if I wanted to. I can barely stand. Then let's get you inside before you fall over." Supporting him proved more difficult than Elena expected. He was heavy, all muscle and bone, and clearly in more pain than he wanted to show. Each step seemed to cost him, his breath coming in short gasps that might have been from broken ribs. They made it to the back door, and Elena managed to get it open while keeping him upright. The warmth of the diner's interior hit them immediately, and Elena heard him make a sound, relief mixed with something like grief. How long had he been out in the cold? How long had he been running? She guided him to the nearest booth, helping him slide onto the red vinyl seat. In the diner's fluorescent lighting, his injuries looked even worse. The cut above his eyebrow definitely needed stitches, and the bruising on his face had started to purple in earnest. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, exhausted beyond measure but also alert, constantly scanning the room, the windows, the doors. The eyes of someone who'd learned the hard way that danger could come from anywhere. "Stay here," Elena said, moving behind the counter. "I'm going to lock the front door and close the blinds." He nodded, watching her with that same wariness. She quickly moved around the diner, locking the door, flipping the closed sign, pulling down the old Venetian blinds that Rosie kept threatening to replace. Within minutes, the diner became a sealed bubble, cut off from the outside world. Elena washed her hands at the kitchen sink, then pulled out ingredients from the refrigerator. The grill was still warm from the evening rush, and she set to work with the efficiency of someone who'd cooked thousands of meals in this space. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast. Simple, filling, warm. The kind of meal that could bring someone back from the edge. While the food cooked, she grabbed the first aid kit from under the counter, a well-stocked box that Rosie insisted on maintaining because you never know when someone's going to cut themselves on something. She carried it to the booth, setting it on the table. "I'm going to clean those cuts," she said, not asking permission. She dampened a clean towel with warm water and antiseptic, then gently reached toward his face. He flinched, an instinctive reaction, then forced himself still. Elena worked carefully, dabbing at the cut above his eyebrow. He winced, but didn't pull away. "This should have stitches," she said quietly. "Can't go to a hospital." "I figured." She applied butterfly bandages, doing her best to pull the edges of the cut together. "I'm Elena, by the way." He hesitated, and she could see him calculating whether to give a real name or a false one. "Marco," he finally said. "Is that your real name? Does it matter?" "I guess not." She moved to the other cuts on his face, working with gentle efficiency. "Are you going to tell me what happened? Would you believe me if I said I fell down the stairs?" "No." "Smart." He was quiet while she worked, his eyes following her movements. "Why are you doing this?" Elena paused, considering the question. Why was she doing this? She had no good answer, nothing that would make sense to an outsider. "When I was 17, she said slowly, "I lived in my car for 3 months. My parents had died. I had no other family, and the foster system wasn't going to take someone my age. I worked at a gas station during the day, slept in the car at night, and tried to save enough for a deposit on an apartment." She returned to cleaning his wounds, but continued talking. "One night it was winter, cold like tonight. My car wouldn't start. Dead battery. I was stuck in that parking lot with no heat, no money to fix it, nowhere to go. I thought," she swallowed hard at the memory, "I thought I might not make it through the night." Marco was watching her intently now, really looking at her for the first time. This guy came out of the gas station, older man, must have been in his 60s. He saw me sitting there, saw the situation, and he could have just walked away. But he didn't. He jumped my car, drove me to an all-night diner, bought me a hot meal, and gave me the phone number of someone who ran a boarding house for young people. Said no strings attached, just pass it forward someday. "Did you?" Marco asked quietly. "Pass it forward?" Elena looked at him, this broken man in her booth, and smiled slightly. "I'm trying to." The timer on the grill beeped, and she returned to the kitchen. The smell of cooking food filled the diner. Bacon sizzling, eggs frying, toast browning. Simple smells, but powerful. The smell of sustenance, of comfort, of home. She plated the food generously. This wasn't a time to be stingy, and brought it to the booth along with a large glass of water and a cup of coffee. Marco stared at the plate like it was a mirage that might disappear if he blinked. "Eat," Elena said simply, sliding into the booth across from him. He picked up the fork, his hand shaking slightly, and took a bite. Then another, and then he was eating in earnest. Not frantically, but with the focused intensity of someone who'd forgotten what real food tasted like. Elena watched silently, sipping her own coffee, giving him space. When he'd finished more than half the plate, he slowed down, taking a long drink of water. "Thank you," he said, and there was genuine emotion in those 2 words. "You have no idea what this means." "You're welcome." Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, feeling its warmth. "Do you want to tell me what happened? Who did this to you?" Marco set down his fork, his expression hardening. "The less you know, the safer you are." I think we're past that point, don't you? I've already helped you. If someone's looking for you and they find out I fed you, gave you shelter. She let the sentence hang. He studied her, seeming to wage an internal battle. Finally, he sighed. What do you know about organized crime? Elena's stomach tightened. Only what I see in movies. Movies get it wrong, Marco said, his voice flat. They make it seem glamorous, exciting. The truth is darker, uglier. It's violence and fear and people who see other humans as tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. And you're part of that world, Elena said, not quite a question. Was, Marco corrected. I was born into it. My father ran operations on the South Side for 30 years. When he died 5 years ago, I took over. Not because I wanted to, but because it's what was expected. What I'd been groomed for since I was old enough to understand what my family really did. Elena tried to process this information. The man sitting across from her eating eggs and bacon in her diner ran organized crime operations. Should run, maybe. Past tense. What changed? Marco laughed that bitter laugh again. I did. Or I tried to. Turns out you can't just walk away from that life. They don't give you a retirement party and a gold watch. He touched the cut above his eye, wincing. I tried to go legitimate. Started moving money into legal businesses, cutting ties with the dirty operations. Thought I could transition everything clean over time. Someone didn't like that, Elena guessed. My second in command, Victor. Marco's jaw tightened just saying the name. He saw it as weakness, betrayal of everything we stood for. He convinced others that I'd lost my edge, that I was going to bring everything down. He paused, staring at nothing. 2 nights ago, they came for me. My own men, people I'd trusted with my life. How did you escape? Barely. Victor wanted it to look like a rival gang hit, so they took me to a warehouse near the docks. I managed to get free during transport, broke the driver's nose, jumped from a moving vehicle. Been running ever since. He gestured to his injuries. They've been hunting me. Every street, every business, every contact I have, they're all watching, waiting. Elena felt the weight of what he was telling her. This wasn't a simple story of someone down on their luck. This was someone being actively hunted, someone whose life was in immediate danger. And by helping him, she'd put herself in danger too. You should have told me this before I brought you inside, she said quietly. I know. I'm sorry. If you want me to leave right now, I understand. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the blood and bruises, beneath the expensive clothes now ruined, she saw something she recognized. Fear, yes, but also determination. And something else, shame. He was ashamed of what he'd been, of the life he'd led, of the violence he'd surely been part of. When you tried to go legitimate, Elena asked, were you serious? Or was it just a strategy? Marco met her eyes. I was serious. I've done things. He stopped, swallowed hard. I've done things I can't take back. Hurt people, destroyed lives. I can't change the past, but I thought maybe I could stop making it worse. Build something different. But Victor, the others, they didn't want different. They wanted what they'd always known. The diner's old clock ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt heavy with consequence. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the closed blinds before moving on. Somewhere in the city, men were looking for Marco, hunting him with the intention to finish what they'd started. Elena thought about the man who'd helped her years ago, who'd given her a chance when he had no reason to. She thought about the thousands of customers she'd served in this diner, each with their own stories, their own struggles. She thought about her own journey, from a scared teenager sleeping in a car to a woman with a home, a job, a life she'd built from nothing. There's a storage room in the back, she said finally. It's small, but there's an old couch back there that Rosie uses during her breaks. You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. Marco stared at her, disbelief clear on his face. You're serious? After everything I just told you? You said you were trying to change. Maybe you deserve a chance to actually do that. Elena stood up, collecting his empty plate. But I need you to promise me something. What? Don't make me regret this. Don't bring violence into this place. This diner, it's not much, but it's good. It's clean. People come here because it's safe, because it's predictable. If you staying here puts that at risk, I understand, Marco said, standing slowly, carefully. And for what it's worth, I promise no violence. If they find me, I'll leave before anything happens here. Elena nodded, then gestured for him to follow her. They moved through the diner, past the kitchen, to a door marked storage. Inside was exactly what she'd described. A small room lined with shelves holding supplies, and in the corner, an old brown couch that had seen better days. "It's not much," Elena said. "It's everything," Marco replied quietly. She brought him a blanket from the top shelf, clean but old, used for emergencies. "The bathroom's through there if you need it. There should be soap and clean towels under the sink." "Elena," Marco said as she turned to leave. "Why are you really doing this?" She paused in the doorway, considering. "Because everyone should get a chance to be better than their worst moment. Because someone helped me once when they didn't have to. Because," she smiled slightly, "because dinner was still warm." She left him there, closing the door quietly behind her. In the main diner, she cleaned up the plate and cup, wiped down the surfaces, and tried to process what she'd just done. She'd brought a fugitive, a criminal, someone being actively hunted into her workplace, into a place she'd spent 6 years building trust and relationships. This could end badly. This could end very badly. But as Elena locked up the diner and stepped out into the cold November night, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Something about Marco's eyes, about his story, about the way he'd said, "I was trying to change." It had resonated with something deep inside her. She pulled out her phone to call Rosie as promised, but paused before dialing. What would she say? Everything was fine? That was technically true. Nothing had happened yet. Elena dialed the number. "Hey Rosie, it's me. I'm heading home now. Everything's locked up." "Good, good. You be careful walking to your car, honey." "I will. See you tomorrow." She ended the call and walked to her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better days but still ran. As she drove through Chicago's streets toward her small apartment, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. In the diner's storage room, Marco lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The warmth, the food, the simple act of human kindness. It all felt surreal after days of running, hiding, surviving. He touched the bandages Elena had applied to his face, still slightly damp. He thought about Victor, about the betrayal, about the empire he'd been trying to dismantle. They would find him eventually. Men like Victor didn't give up, didn't forgive. The only question was how much time he had. But tonight, for the first time in days, Marco felt something other than fear and desperation. He felt hope, fragile, uncertain hope, kindled by a waitress who'd looked at him eating from garbage and offered dinner instead of judgment. He closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him under. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own dangers. But tonight, he was warm, fed, and safe. Tonight, that was enough. Outside, the November wind continued to blow through Chicago's streets, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and the weight of choices made. In the distance, sirens wailed, the constant soundtrack of the city, but inside the diner, all was quiet. The first chapter had closed, but the story was just beginning. Morning came too early for Elena. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning in her small apartment, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marco's face, bruised, exhausted, desperate. She saw herself making choices that any rational person would question. What had she been thinking? Bringing a stranger into the diner, a stranger who admitted to being part of organized crime? But then she remembered his eyes, the shame in his voice when he talked about his past, the way he'd said, "I was trying to change." That had to mean something, didn't it? The alarm on her phone buzzed at 5:30 a.m. and Elena dragged herself out of bed. The Chicago morning was dark and cold, frost forming patterns on her window. She showered quickly, the hot water helping to clear the fog from her brain, and dressed in her usual work clothes, black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes, the uniform of someone who spent 12 hours on their feet. As she drove back to the diner through empty streets, Elena's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. What would she find when she got there? Would Marco still be there? Would he have left in the night, disappearing as suddenly as he'd appeared? Part of her hoped he had. It would be simpler, safer. But another part, the part that had offered him help in the first place, hoped he was still there. The diner's parking lot was empty when she arrived at 6 a.m. She unlocked the front door, flipped on the lights, and stood for a moment in the familiar space. Everything looked normal. Booths in neat rows, counter-cleaned coffee pots ready to be filled. No sign that anything unusual had happened here just hours ago. Elena moved through her opening routine on autopilot, starting the coffee, preheating the grill, checking inventory, setting up the register. But her mind was elsewhere, focused on the storage room door at the back of the diner. She hadn't heard any sounds from there yet. Maybe he really had left. She was pouring her first cup of coffee when she heard it, a soft creak from the back. Her heart jumped, and she set down the pot carefully, trying to steady her suddenly shaking hands. The storage room door opened slowly, and Marco emerged. In the morning light, he looked different. Still injured, still bruised, but somehow more human. He'd cleaned himself up, his face washed, his hair combed back with wet fingers, his torn shirt buttoned as best it could be over the bandages she'd applied. He moved stiffly, clearly in pain, but there was a determined set to his shoulders. "Good morning," Elena said quietly, aware that her voice sounded too loud in the empty diner. "Morning." Marco paused in the doorway, as if unsure whether he was allowed to come further. "I hope it's okay that I used the bathroom sink. I tried not to make a mess." "It's fine." Elena poured a second cup of coffee, adding cream and sugar, and brought it to him. "How did you sleep?" He accepted the cup, wrapping his hands around it like she had the night before. "Better than I have in days. That couch is more comfortable than it looks." He took a sip, closing his eyes briefly. "Thank you. For everything." They stood there awkwardly. Two strangers connected by circumstances neither fully understood. Elena noticed details she'd missed in the darkness and chaos of last night. The strong line of his jaw beneath the bruising, the way he held himself despite the injuries, the expensive watch still on his wrist that he somehow hadn't pawned or lost. This was a man used to being in control, used to commanding respect, now reduced to accepting charity from a waitress. "I should go," Marco said finally, setting down the cup. "Before your boss arrives, before customers start coming. You've done more than enough, and the longer I stay, the more danger I put you in." "Wait," Elena heard herself say. "Have you eaten?" "Elena, it's a simple question. Have you eaten this morning?" He shook his head. "I'm not hungry." "That's not true. You're starving. I can see it." She moved toward the kitchen. "Sit down. Let me make you breakfast, and then we can talk about what happens next." Marco looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion and hunger won out. He carefully lowered himself into the nearest booth, the same one from last night, and watched as Elena worked. She fell into the familiar rhythm of cooking. Eggs, bacon, pancakes this time, hash browns. The diner would open in 30 minutes, and the first customers would start trickling in around 6:45. She had time, but not much. "Tell me about Victor," Elena said as she cooked, keeping her voice casual. "You're second in command. How long did you know him?" Marco was quiet for a moment. 15 years. He worked for my father first, came up through the ranks. When my father died and I took over, Victor was the logical choice to be my right hand. He knew the operations, knew the people, knew how everything worked. You trusted him. Completely. That was my mistake." Bitterness crept into Marco's voice. "I thought loyalty meant something in that world. I thought the years we'd worked together, the things we'd been through, counted for something. But I was wrong." Elena flipped the pancakes, watching them brown. "When did you realize he was going to betray you?" "Too late. I'd been making changes for about 6 months. Gradually, carefully. Selling off properties, cutting ties with certain operations, moving money into legitimate businesses. Victor voiced concerns, but I thought he'd come around eventually. I thought once he saw we could make just as much money legally, he'd understand. But he didn't. No. To him, to the others, what I was doing looked like weakness. In that world, weakness gets you destroyed. They started holding meetings without me, making decisions, questioning my judgment. I should have seen it coming, but I was so focused on the end game, getting out clean, that I missed the warning signs. The food was ready. Elena plated it and brought it to the booth, sliding in across from Marco. He stared at the breakfast like it was a feast. "Eat," she said simply. He did, more slowly this time than last night, savoring each bite. Elena sipped her coffee and watched the windows, watching the street outside gradually come to life. A delivery truck rumbled past. A jogger in bright workout gear ran by, breath visible in the cold air. Normal morning routines, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside this small diner. "Can I ask you something?" Marco said between bites. "Sure. Why aren't you more afraid?" Most people, they'd have called the police the moment they saw me, or at least thrown me out, locked the doors, pretended they never saw anything. He set down his fork, looking at her with genuine curiosity. "But you brought me inside, fed me, let me sleep here. Why?" Elena considered the question. She'd been asking herself the same thing all night. "I told you about the man who helped me when I was living in my car. But I didn't tell you the whole story. I'm listening. After he gave me the phone number for the boarding house, I almost didn't call it. I was proud, stubborn. I'd survived 3 months on my own, and asking for help felt like admitting defeat. Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. But it was getting colder, and I knew I wouldn't make it through another week. So I called. She paused, remembering that phone call, how her voice had shaken as she explained her situation to the woman who answered. The boarding house was run by this older couple, the Harrisons. They'd started it after their own daughter became homeless following a mental health crisis. They understood what it was like to fall through the cracks, to have nowhere to turn. They gave me a room, asked for minimal rent, and more importantly, they treated me like a person, not a charity case. That's where you stayed? For 2 years. Mrs. Harrison helped me get my GED, then helped me apply for community college. I took business classes at night while working during the day. I was going to own my own restaurant someday, have something that was truly mine. Elena smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That didn't work out. College was more expensive than I thought, even community college. I had to drop out after 3 semesters. But you ended up here, Marco said. That's something. It is. Rosie hired me 6 years ago when I needed a job desperately. The Harrisons had told me I could stay as long as I needed, but I wanted to be independent, wanted to prove I could make it on my own. Rosie took a chance on me. I had no experience, no references, nothing. She just saw someone who needed an opportunity. Elena looked around the diner, at the worn booths and vintage fixtures, the faded pictures on the walls showing the diner in various decades. This place became my home. The regular customers became like family, and I learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, letting someone prove themselves, offering a hot meal, giving someone a place to sleep, those acts can change everything. Marco was quiet, absorbing her story. So when you saw me in that alley, I saw someone who needed help. Someone who, despite everything he'd done, despite wherever he'd come from, was still human, still deserving of basic compassion. She met his eyes. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm going to regret this. But I'd rather take that risk than become someone who can walk past suffering without stopping. Before Marco could respond, the front door opened. Both of them tensed, but it was only Rosie, arriving early as she often did. Elena, you're here already? Rosie called out, not yet seeing Marco in the booth. Couldn't sleep either, huh? I tell you, this cold weather plays havoc with my... She stopped mid-sentence, finally noticing the man sitting in the booth. Her eyes widened, taking in his bruised face, his torn clothes, the obvious signs of violence. Her gaze snapped to Elena, a dozen questions in that single look. Rosie, Elena stood quickly. This is Marco. He needed help last night. Rosie looked between them, her expression unreadable. She'd run this diner for 40 years, had seen everything Chicago's streets had to offer. She wasn't easily shocked, but this clearly caught her off guard. Help, Rosie repeated slowly. What kind of help? The kind where someone has nowhere else to go, Elena said carefully. I let him sleep in the storage room. I was going to talk to you about it this morning, I swear. I wasn't trying to hide anything. Marco started to stand. Ma'am, I'm sorry for any trouble. I'll leave right now if... Sit down, Rosie said firmly. She moved behind the counter, poured herself a cup of coffee, and studied Marco with the sharp assessment of someone who'd dealt with all types of people. You in trouble with the law? It's complicated, Marco admitted. Complicated meaning, yes. Rosie turned to Elena. And you just decided to bring him here? To my diner? I did. And if you want to fire me, I understand. But I'd make the same choice again. Rosie was silent for a long moment, sipping her coffee, thinking. Elena held her breath, aware that her impulsive decision last night might cost her not just her job, but the closest thing to family she had left. How long has it been since you ate a proper meal? Rosie finally asked Marco. He blinked, surprised by the question. 2-3 days before last night. Elena fed me then, too. And where will you go when you leave here? I don't know yet. Rosie sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. Elena, can I talk to you in the kitchen? Privately? Elena followed Rosie into the back, her heart pounding. Through the serving window, she could see Marco sitting in the booth, his posture tense, probably expecting the worst. All right, Rosie said once they were alone. Tell me everything, and I mean everything. No sugarcoating, no protecting me from the truth. What did you get yourself into? Elena explained it all, finding Marco in the dumpster, bringing him inside, learning about his past, his attempts to go legitimate, the betrayal. She left nothing out, knowing that Rosie deserved the complete truth. When she finished, Rosie leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. Lord, child, you really know how to complicate your life, don't you? I know it was stupid. I know I should have called the police or just walked away. But Rosie, you always taught me that this diner stands for something, that we treat people with dignity, that we help when we can. How could I walk past someone who needed help and still call myself the person you trained me to be? Rosie looked at her, and Elena saw emotions warring in the older woman's eyes. Concern, frustration, but also something like pride. You're right. I did teach you that, and I meant it. But Elena, this is different. This isn't giving a free meal to someone who's short on cash or letting someone warm up on a cold day. This man has dangerous people looking for him. I know. If they find him here, I know, Elena repeated. But what else could I have done? Rosie was quiet, then suddenly laughed. A short, sharp sound. You know what? You remind me of me at your age. Stubborn, idealistic, convinced I could save everyone. She shook her head. Fine. He can stay in the storage room for now, but only for a few days until he figures out his next move. And if anything seems off, if any dangerous-looking people start hanging around, he's gone. Understood? Relief flooded through Elena. Understood. Thank you, Rosie. Don't thank me yet. We might both regret this. Rosie headed back to the dining area, Elena following. Marco, she addressed him directly. You can stay for a few days, but you follow our rules. You stay in that storage room during business hours unless Elena says otherwise. You don't bring trouble to my door, and you help out. Cleaning, dishes, whatever needs doing. If you're going to be here, you're going to earn your keep. Marco stood, something like respect in his eyes. Yes, ma'am, thank you. I won't forget this. See that you don't. Rosie checked her watch. Elena, finish getting the place ready to open. Marco, you need to be out of sight in 10 minutes. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The morning rush started at 6:45, exactly as Elena predicted. The diner filled with the usual crowd, construction workers grabbing breakfast before their shift, nurses coming off the night shift at the hospital 3 blocks away, students from the community college stopping by before early classes. Elena moved through her routine with practiced ease, but her mind was partially elsewhere, aware of Marco hidden in the storage room. Around 8:30 a.m., during a brief lull between the breakfast and mid-morning crowds, Elena brought Marco another cup of coffee and a plate of leftover pancakes. She found him sitting on the couch, staring at his hands. You okay? She asked, setting down the food. I've been thinking, Marco said slowly, about what happens next. I can't stay here indefinitely. Victor's people, they're thorough. They'll check every business, every contact, every place I might go. Eventually, they'll come here. Then we make sure you're gone before they do. It's not that simple. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. There's evidence, documentation of everything Victor's done, everything the organization has done. I kept records, insurance in case things went wrong. I need to get to it. Where is it? A safety deposit box at a bank downtown. But I can't just walk in there. Victor will have people watching, waiting for me to make exactly that kind of move. Elena sat down on the couch beside him thinking, what if someone else got it for you? Someone he wouldn't expect. You mean you? Marco shook his head. Absolutely not. I won't put you in more danger than I already have. I'm already in danger, aren't I? You said yourself that if Victor finds out someone helped you, they're in trouble too. So either I'm at risk or I'm not. You can't have it both ways. Elena, listen to me. You need that evidence if you're going to have any chance of fixing this, right? Of proving what Victor did, maybe even going to the authorities? Yes, but then let me help. I'm just a waitress. No one would suspect me of being connected to you. I could go to the bank during my lunch break, get whatever's in that box and bring it back here. Simple. Marco looked at her like she'd suggested they rob the bank instead. It's not simple. There are procedures, security measures. You can't just access someone else's safety deposit box. What if you authorized me? Isn't there paperwork for that? He was quiet, considering. There is. I'd need to call the bank, add you as an authorized party. But Elena, if something goes wrong, if Victor's people are watching and they see you, then I'll handle it. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Marco. I'm not helpless. She could see him wrestling with the decision, weighing risks against necessity. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but we do this carefully. I'll call the bank when they open, set everything up. You go during the busiest time of day when there are lots of people around. Safety in numbers. And if anything feels wrong, you walk away. You don't try to be a hero. Deal. They spent the next hour planning. Marco explained exactly what was in the safety deposit box. A USB drive containing financial records, communications, evidence of illegal activities. Everything he'd collected over the years, not quite knowing why, but some instinct telling him he might need it someday. Why did you keep all this? Elena asked. If you were part of it, these records incriminate you too. I know, but I think part of me always knew I wanted out. Keeping the records was like keeping a door open, a way to leave if I ever found the courage. He looked at his hands again. My father used to say that in our world, information is power. The more you know, the more protected you are. I never thought I'd use it like this, though. At 11 a.m. during the late breakfast lull, Marco used Elena's phone to call the bank. She listened to his side of the conversation, noting how his voice changed. More formal, more authoritative. The voice of someone used to being obeyed. Yes, I need to add an authorized party to my safety deposit box. Elena Martinez. She'll be coming by this afternoon. Yes, I understand there's a fee. Thank you. He hung up and handed the phone back to Elena. It's done. They'll have your name at the front desk. You'll need your ID, and they'll verify with me before giving you access. The box number is 847. 847, got it. Elena, I mean it. If anything seems wrong, I know. Walk away. You've told me 3 times. He managed a slight smile. I'm not used to relying on other people for help, especially not people who have no reason to help me. You'll get used to it. The lunch rush started around 11:30 and Elena threw herself into work. Rosie noticed her distraction and gave her a sharp look but said nothing. The diner filled with office workers from nearby buildings, delivery drivers, and the usual collection of regulars who came for Rosie's famous meatloaf. At 1 p.m. during the post-lunch lull, Elena told Rosie she needed to run an errand. Rosie's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Be careful. I will. Elena changed out of her work shirt into a plain sweater she kept in her locker, trying to look more like a regular customer than a waitress. She told Marco she was leaving, saw the worry in his eyes, and gave him what she hoped was a confident smile. The bank was only 6 blocks away, close enough to walk despite the cold. Elena kept her head down, moving with purpose, trying to look like someone on a normal errand. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though every time she turned around there was nothing suspicious. Just people going about their day. The bank was busy, which was good. Elena joined the line, waiting her turn, trying to control her breathing. This was simple. Walk in, show ID, access the box, walk out. Nothing to it. Next, please. Elena approached the desk, where a woman in her 50s with glasses and a nameplate reading Mrs. Chen smiled professionally. Hi, I need to access a safety deposit box. Number 847. I should be on the authorized list. Elena Martinez. Mrs. Chen typed on her computer, reviewing the information. Ah yes, Mr. Castellano called earlier. I'll need to see your ID, please. Elena handed over her driver's license, watching as Mrs. Chen compared the photo to her face, then made a few notes. Everything appears to be in order. If you'll follow me, please. They went through a secure door, down a hallway lined with more safe deposit boxes than Elena had imagined existed. Mrs. Chen used 2 keys, one from her desk, one that Marco had told Elena would be taped under the couch in the storage room, which she'd retrieved earlier, and opened box 847. Inside was a single USB drive exactly as Marco had described. Take your time, Mrs. Chen said. Just let me know when you're finished. Elena pocketed the drive, her heart racing. I'm done, actually. Thank you. The walk back to the diner felt longer than the walk there. Every car that slowed down, every person who looked at her twice, sent adrenaline spiking through her system. But she made it back without incident, pushing through the diner's door with relief. Marco was in the storage room, pacing like a caged animal. When Elena appeared with the USB drive, the relief on his face was palpable. Any problems? He asked immediately. None. It was easy. Elena handed him the drive. What now? Marco held the small device like it was made of gold. Now I have leverage. Evidence. A way to fight back instead of just running. He looked at Elena. I need to contact someone. Someone I trust who's not part of Victor's circle. A lawyer I used for the legitimate businesses I was trying to build. You can use my phone. Thank you, but I should do this from somewhere else. Using your phone could create a trail back to you. Marco paused. There's a payphone 2 blocks from here outside the convenience store. Do those still work? Elena almost laughed. Barely, but yes. You want to go now? After the dinner rush when it's dark? Less chance of being recognized? They waited, the hours crawling by. Elena worked the evening shift, serving regulars who asked about her day, making small talk, pretending everything was normal. But inside, her nerves felt stretched thin. It was nearly 8 p.m. when the dinner crowd finally thinned. Rosie had left at 7, trusting Elena to close up as she often did. Marco emerged from the storage room wearing a jacket Elena had grabbed from the lost and found. Not a perfect fit, but better than his torn clothes. Ready? Elena asked. As I'll ever be. They left through the back door, moving quickly through the alley. The November night was bitter cold, and Elena pulled her coat tighter. The payphone was where she remembered, attached to the wall of a convenience store, somehow still functional in an age when everyone had cell phones. Marco picked up the receiver, fed coins into the slot, and dialed a number he apparently had memorized. Elena stood nearby, trying to look casual while keeping watch. Robert, it's Marco Castellano. Yes, I know you've heard things. Listen, I need your help. I have evidence, documentation of everything Victor's done. I know it's dangerous, but Robert, please, you're the only person I can trust with this. Elena watched his face as he talked, seeing hope and desperation warring in his expression. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt longer. Finally, Marco hung up. Well? Elena asked. He'll help. He's scared, but he'll help. We're meeting tomorrow night at his office. Marco looked at Elena. He suggested I go to the FBI, turn myself in along with the evidence. Offer to testify in exchange for protection and a reduced sentence. That sounds like a good plan. It means admitting to everything I've done, facing consequences for all of it. Isn't that what you wanted? A chance to make things right? Marco was quiet, then nodded slowly. Yes it is. It's just, once I do this, there's no going back. My old life, such as it was, is over. Maybe that's not a bad thing. They walked back to the diner in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were inside, door locked behind them, that Elena realized how much danger they were both in. Marco making contact with his lawyer, moving pieces into place. It all meant Victor would eventually find out, would come looking. As if reading her mind, Marco said, After tomorrow, you need to distance yourself from all this. Tell people I threatened you, forced you to help, whatever you need to say to stay safe. I'm not going to lie about helping you. Elena, when this comes out, and it will, Victor's people will be looking for anyone connected to me, anyone who helped me. I won't let you become a target. Then we'll be careful. But I'm not abandoning you now, Marco. You're going to need someone in your corner when you walk into that FBI office. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Elena thought about her answer. Really thought about it. Because I think people deserve second chances. Because I think you're genuinely trying to change. And because, she paused, searching for the right words. Because sometimes you meet someone and you just know you're supposed to help them. I can't explain it better than that. Even if it puts you in danger, even then. They stood in the empty diner, the only light coming from the security lamp in the corner. Outside, Chicago continued its endless rhythm. Cars passing, sirens in the distance, life moving forward. But inside this small space, time felt suspended, crystallized in this moment of connection between two people from completely different worlds. I should let you go home, Marco said finally. You've been on your feet all day. I should get some sleep, Elena agreed, but neither of them moved. Elena, Marco said, and there was something different in his voice now. I want you to know, when this is over, when I've testified and everything's done, I'm going to pay you back for this. For the food, the shelter, the help, all of it. I don't want your money, Marco. Then what do you want? She smiled. I want you to actually change, to become the person you're trying to be. That would be payment enough. He shook his head slowly, something like wonder in his eyes. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm really not. I'm just someone trying to do the right thing. That's exactly what makes you remarkable. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks and broke eye contact. I should really go. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Yeah, get some rest. She gathered her things, double-checked that the doors were locked, and left Marco in the storage room. As she drove home through the dark streets, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Tomorrow, Marco would meet with his lawyer. Soon after, he'd go to the authorities. And then what? She couldn't think that far ahead. For now, she'd helped someone who needed it. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. In the storage room, Marco lay on the couch, the USB drive clutched in his hand. He thought about Elena, about her kindness, her courage, her unwavering belief that people could change. He thought about the life he'd lived, the choices he'd made, the harm he'd caused. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of making it right, of facing consequences and accepting responsibility. It wouldn't erase the past, but it might create the possibility of a different future. For the first time in years, Marco felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Outside, the Chicago night pressed against the windows, cold and indifferent. Somewhere in the city, Victor was planning, searching, hunting. The danger was real and growing closer. But tonight, in this small diner on the south side, two unlikely allies had forged a bond that would be tested in ways neither could imagine. The second chapter had closed, but the story was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, and decisions that would reshape both their lives forever. The next morning started with tension. Elena arrived at the diner to find Marco already awake, nervous energy radiating from him. Tonight was the meeting with his lawyer, his chance at redemption. "You okay?" Elena asked, pouring coffee. "Just anxious. This could change everything." The breakfast rush proceeded normally until 9 a.m., when two men in dark suits entered. Elena's stomach dropped. They didn't look like regular customers. Too alert, too focused. They sat at the counter ordering coffee they barely touched while their eyes scanned everything. One of them pulled out a photo. "Excuse me, miss. Have you seen this man?" Elena's heart pounded as she looked at Marco's picture. She forced herself to stay calm, shaking her head. "No, sorry. Lots of people come through here, though." The men exchanged glances. "If you do see him, call this number. There's a reward." They left a card and departed. Through the window, Elena watched them check the alley, the same alley where she'd found Marco. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the diner as Elena cleaned tables with mechanical precision. Her hands moved automatically. Wipe, spray, wipe again. But her mind was miles away, replaying the morning's encounter with Victor's men over and over like a movie stuck on repeat. They knew. Maybe they didn't know Marco was here specifically, but they were close. Too close. The way those men had studied the diner, the alley, the surrounding buildings, they were narrowing their search, eliminating possibilities one by one. It was only a matter of time. Marco's meeting with his lawyer was scheduled for 8 p.m. at Robert's downtown office. 6 more hours. Could they make it 6 more hours without being discovered? "Elena, honey, you've wiped that same table 3 times now." Rosie's voice cut through her thoughts. The older woman stood behind the counter, concern etched deep in the lines of her face. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Elena set down her cloth and moved to the counter, keeping her voice low despite the diner being relatively empty. Just 2 customers in corner booths, both absorbed in their phones. Victor's people were here this morning, showing Marco's picture, asking questions. Rosie's expression hardened. "What did you tell them?" "That I hadn't seen him. They believed me, I think." "But Rosie, they're searching systematically. They'll be back or they'll send others. And if they find him here, then we make sure he's gone before that happens." Rosie pulled out her phone, checking the time. "When's his meeting?" 8 o'clock. Downtown. That's rush hour. Lots of people on the streets, lots of movement. Good. Rosie drummed her fingers on the counter, thinking. "My nephew, Tommy, he drives for a rideshare company. He owes me a favor. I could have him pick Marco up from the back alley, drive him to the meeting. No connection to you, no trail leading back here." Relief flooded through Elena. "Would he do that? For me?" "Yes. He's a good kid. Keeps his mouth shut." Rosie was already dialing. "Tommy, it's Aunt Rosie. I need a favor and I need you to not ask questions." While Rosie arranged transportation, Elena checked on Marco. She found him in the storage room, pacing like he had been all day. The USB drive sat on the small table, next to a notepad where he'd been writing, preparing what to say maybe, or documenting last-minute details he'd remembered. "There's a development," Elena said, and explained about Rosie's nephew. Marco listened, then nodded slowly. "That's smart. Better than walking out the front door or calling a cab that could be traced." He paused, studying her face. "You look worried." "I am worried. Those men this morning. Marco, they're not going to give up. Even after you testify, even after Victor's arrested, there will be others. People who feel betrayed, who want revenge. I know. He moved to the small window, peering through the gap in the curtain at the alley outside. That's why witness protection exists. New name, new city, new life. I'll disappear. The words hit Elena harder than she expected. Of course he would disappear. That was the point. The only way he'd be safe. But somehow, in the chaos of the last 2 days, she hadn't fully processed what that meant. Marco would walk out of her life as suddenly as he'd entered it, and she'd never see him again. That's good, she managed to say. That you'll be safe. He turned from the window and something in his expression suggested he understood what she wasn't saying. Elena, these past 2 days, I know it's been complicated and dangerous, but you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. What's that? Hope. A reason to believe that change is actually possible. That I'm not defined forever by the worst things I've done. Marco crossed the small room, standing close enough that she could see the fading bruises on his face, the cuts that were starting to heal. I won't forget that. I won't forget you. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because when I'm in witness protection, starting over somewhere new, I'm going to remember that someone believed I was worth saving. That's going to matter on the hard days. Elena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. This wasn't the time for emotion. They still had hours to get through, and she needed to stay focused. We should go over the plan again. Make sure we haven't missed anything. They spent the next hour reviewing every detail. Tommy would arrive at 7:30, pulling into the alley behind the diner. Marco would leave through the back door, get in the car, and Tommy would drive him to Robert's office building downtown. Robert would be waiting, along with a federal agent he'd already contacted, someone he trusted, someone who specialized in organized crime cases. Marco would hand over the USB drive, make his statement, and formally request witness protection in exchange for his testimony against Victor and the entire organization. If everything went according to plan, he'd be in federal custody by 9 p.m., safe from Victor's reach. What if something goes wrong? Elena asked. What if Victor's people are watching the lawyer's office? Robert's smart. He'll have thought of that. And once I'm with federal agents, even Victor won't risk an attack. It would bring too much attention, too much heat. Marco tried to sound confident, but Elena heard the uncertainty underneath. The dinner rush started at 5:30 and Elena forced herself to work normally. Smile at customers, take orders, deliver food, make small talk. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Every unfamiliar face made her pulse quicken. But the evening progressed without incident. Just regular people eating regular meals, unaware of the drama unfolding in the storage room. At 7 p.m., Rosie sent Elena on an early break. Go. Talk to him. You both need this. Elena found Marco dressed in clean clothes, a pair of jeans and a button-down shirt from the Lost, and found that actually fit reasonably well. He'd shaved using a disposable razor from the first aid kit, and without the bruises and blood and exhaustion, Elena could see him clearly for the first time. This was who he might have been in another life. Someone successful, confident, normal. You clean up well, she said with a small smile. I borrowed these. I'll replace everything, I promise. Don't worry about it. Elena sat on the couch and Marco joined her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the diner beyond the door, dishes clattering, conversations humming, Rosie calling out an order to the kitchen. I've been thinking about what comes after, Marco said quietly. After the testimony, after witness protection places me somewhere new, I'll need to find work, build a life. I was thinking maybe something simple, construction, warehouse work, something with my hands, something honest. You'd be good at that. You've got a strong work ethic. I saw how you cleaned up after yourself, tried to help despite your injuries. I want to be the kind of person who contributes something positive, who helps instead of harms. He looked at his hands, hands that had done things he regretted, hands that were now trying to build something different. Do you think that's possible? Real redemption? Elena thought about her own journey, from a scared teenager living in a car to a woman with a job, a home, a life. I think redemption is possible if you're willing to do the work. It won't be easy, and it won't erase the past. But yes, I think people can change. Even people like me. Especially people like you. Because you're trying. That matters. The alarm on Elena's phone buzzed. 7:25 p.m. 5 minutes until Tommy arrived. Her stomach clenched with nerves and something else she didn't want to name. It's almost time, she said unnecessarily. Marco stood, gathering the few items he'd accumulated. The USB drive, the notepad, a jacket. He looked around the small storage room that had been his sanctuary for 2 days. I'll never forget this place. This diner. You. Marco. A sharp knock on the back door cut her off. 3 quick raps. A pause. Then 2 more. The signal Rosie had arranged with Tommy. That's him, Elena said, her voice catching slightly. They moved through the diner's kitchen to the back door. Elena checked the peephole, confirmed it was Tommy, a young man in his 20s with Rosie's same kind eyes, then unlocked the door. Hey, Aunt Rosie said you needed a ride? Tommy kept his voice casual, playing his role perfectly. Where we headed? Downtown. I'll give you the address. Marco turned to Elena, and for a moment they just looked at each other. So much had happened in such a short time. 2 days that had changed both their lives fundamentally. Thank you, Marco said simply, for everything. Be safe, Elena replied. And Marco, keep your promise. Become the person you want to be. I will. He stepped out into the alley and Tommy led him to a gray sedan parked nearby. Elena watched from the doorway as they got in, as the car started, as the taillights disappeared around the corner. Just like that, he was gone. She locked the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her going for 2 days drained away all at once, leaving her shaky and hollow. Elena? Rosie appeared in the kitchen doorway. He's gone? Yeah, he's gone. Rosie crossed the room and pulled Elena into a hug, firm and warm and grounding. You did a good thing, honey. A scary, complicated, possibly foolish thing, but a good thing. Elena laughed, though it came out more like a sob. I hope so. Now we wait and see what happens next. What happened next came faster than either of them expected. At 8:45 p.m., as Elena was wiping down tables and preparing to close, 2 police cars pulled up outside the diner. Elena's heart stopped. Had something gone wrong? Had Victor's people intercepted Marco before he reached safety? But when the officers entered, their demeanor was professional, not aggressive. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a badge that read Detective Morrison, approached the counter. Good evening. I'm looking for Elena Martinez. That's me. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to ask you some questions about Marco Castellano. We have reason to believe you may have had contact with him in the last 48 hours. Elena glanced at Rosie, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but we do need your statement. Would you be willing to come to the station voluntarily? The word voluntarily hung in the air, carrying the implication that if Elena refused, it might not remain voluntary for long. Okay, let me get my things. I'm coming too, Rosie said firmly. She's not going anywhere without me. Detective Morrison seemed to consider objecting, then nodded. Fine, follow us, please. The drive to the police station felt surreal. Elena sat in the back of the squad car, not handcuffed, not under arrest, but definitely not free to leave, and watched Chicago's streets pass by. What would she tell them? The truth? Lies to protect herself? Some combination of both? At the station, they were taken to a small interview room, industrial gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a table with chairs on either side. Detective Morrison sat across from Elena while Rosie stood near the door, her presence a silent support. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you. Marco Castellano is currently in federal custody, providing testimony about organized crime activities. He's confirmed that you provided him with shelter and assistance over the past 2 days. Is that accurate? So Marco had told them. Elena felt relief. At least he'd made it safely to the authorities. Yes, that's accurate. Can you explain how you came to be involved with Mr. Castellano? Elena took a breath and told the story, finding Marco in the alley, bringing him inside, learning about his situation, helping him retrieve the evidence he needed. She left nothing out, understanding that honesty was her best protection now. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When Elena finished, the detective set down her pen and studied her for a long moment. Ms. Martinez, do you understand that harboring a fugitive is a crime? He wasn't a fugitive. No warrants had been issued for his arrest. No, but he was involved in criminal activities, and people were actively searching for him to cause him harm. You could have been charged as an accessory. Could have been? Elena caught the past tense. Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Castellano was very clear in his statement that you had no knowledge of his criminal activities when you first helped him, and that you acted purely out of compassion. The federal agent handling his case believes your testimony will be valuable. but they're not interested in prosecuting someone who helped facilitate his cooperation with authorities. Relief washed over Elena so intensely that she felt dizzy. So I'm not in trouble? You're not in trouble. However, I need to warn you. Viktor Morozov and his associates are still at large. They will eventually learn that Mr. Castellano had help, and they may come looking for information about who helped him. You need to be careful. For how long? Until we can arrest Morozov and dismantle his organization. Could be weeks, could be months. In the meantime, we'll have patrol cars increase their presence near your home and workplace. If you notice anything suspicious, anyone following you, strange phone calls, unfamiliar people asking questions, you contact us immediately. Detective Morrison slid a card across the table. My direct number. Call any time, day or night. Elena took the card, the reality of her situation settling over her like a weight. This wasn't over. Not really. Marco might be safe in federal protection, but she was still here, still exposed, still a potential target. Can I ask you something? Elena said. Is Marco okay? Will he be safe? He's in the best hands possible. Witness protection is very effective when people follow the rules. He'll have a new identity, a new location, a chance to start over. Detective Morrison stood. You're free to go, Ms. Martinez. Thank you for your cooperation. Rosie drove Elena home, both of them quiet, processing everything that had happened. When they pulled up outside Elena's apartment building, Rosie turned to her. You going to be okay tonight? You can stay at my place if you don't want to be alone. I'll be okay. I just need to sleep for about 12 hours straight. Call me if you need anything. And Elena, I'm proud of you. What you did was risky and probably crazy, but it was also brave. Not everyone would have helped like you did. Elena hugged her, grateful beyond words for this woman who'd become family. Thank you, Rosie, for everything. Inside her apartment, Elena locked the door, checked all the windows, and finally allowed herself to collapse on her couch. The adrenaline was completely gone now, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. She should eat something, shower, do all the normal evening routines. Instead, she pulled a blanket over herself and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Marco somewhere in federal custody, probably being interviewed, documented, processed into a system that would erase his old identity and create a new one. Would he think about her? About the diner? About the kindness that had been shown when he'd hit his lowest point? She hoped so. She hoped he'd carry that forward, use it as fuel for the new life he was trying to build. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Robert Chen, Marco's attorney. He asked me to tell you that he's safe and grateful. The process is going well. He also wanted you to know that he meant what he said. He won't forget. Elena read the message 3 times, then saved the number before responding. Thank you for letting me know. Please tell him good luck. She set the phone aside and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd return to the diner and try to resume her normal life. But nothing would be truly normal again. She'd crossed a line, taken a risk, and in doing so, had discovered something about herself, that she was capable of more courage than she'd known, more compassion than was probably wise. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless. 6 months later, spring arrived in Chicago with tentative warmth and the promise of renewal. The diner's windows were open, letting in fresh air and the sounds of the city coming back to life after a long winter. Elena moved through the breakfast rush with practiced ease, her rhythm so familiar now that she could almost do it in her sleep. The diner had become busier over the past months. Somehow word had gotten around that this was a place where people were treated with dignity, where compassion mattered more than profit. Rosie joked that they needed to hire another waitress, but Elena could tell she was pleased. The events of November had faded somewhat, though not entirely. Viktor Morozov had been arrested in January, along with 8 other high-ranking members of his organization. The news had covered the story extensively, how an insider had turned against the crime syndicate, providing evidence that led to multiple convictions. Marco's name had been mentioned, though details about his cooperation and whereabouts were kept confidential. Elena had been interviewed twice more by investigators, but after Viktor's arrest, the attention had died down. The increased police patrols near the diner had gradually decreased until life returned to something approaching normal, but Elena hadn't forgotten. She thought about Marco often, especially on cold nights when she took out the trash and remembered finding him in that alley. She wondered where he was now, what name he used, what kind of work he'd found. She hoped he was happy, or at least content. She hoped he was becoming the person he'd wanted to be. At 10 a.m. during the mid-morning lull, the mailman delivered the diner's usual stack of bills and advertisements. Elena sorted through them absently, while Rosie prepared lunch specials in the kitchen. Then she saw it, a postcard. The front showed a generic landscape, mountains and forest, no identifying features. Elena flipped it over and her breath caught. The message was brief, written in handwriting she recognized despite having only seen it once on that notepad in the storage room. Dinner's still warm. Working construction now. Building things instead of breaking them. You were right. Change is possible. Thank you for seeing the person, not the past. M. No return address, no location marker, nothing that could trace back to wherever he was. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Happy tears this time. He'd made it. He was building a new life, keeping his promise, becoming someone different. What's that? Rosie asked, emerging from the kitchen. A postcard. From a friend. Elena smiled, reading the message again. He's doing well. Rosie looked at the postcard, understanding immediately. Good. That's real good. She squeezed Elena's shoulder. You did that, honey. You gave him a chance when no one else would. He did the hard part. I just offered dinner. Sometimes that's all someone needs. A hot meal and someone who believes in them. Elena pinned the postcard to the bulletin board behind the counter, among photos of regular customers, newspaper clippings about the diner's anniversary, Rosie's grandchildren's artwork. It fit there perfectly. Another piece of the diner's story, another life that had been touched by this place. The door chimed and a young man entered, early 20s, wearing worn clothes with the haunted look of someone who'd been sleeping rough. He approached the counter hesitantly. Excuse me, he said quietly. I don't have much money, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. Is there any way I could work for a meal? Wash dishes, clean, whatever you need? Elena looked at him, seeing the desperation, the pride that made asking for help so difficult, the hope that someone might say yes. She thought about Marco eating from the dumpster. She thought about herself at 17 living in her car. She thought about the man who'd helped her when he didn't have to. Sit down, Elena said warmly, already moving toward the kitchen. Let me get you some breakfast, no work necessary. Really, but I can't pay. Don't worry about it. Everyone deserves a warm meal. The young man's eyes filled with gratitude as he slid into a booth. Elena prepared eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast. The same meal she'd made for Marco that first night. As she cooked, she felt the rightness of this moment, this continuation of a cycle that stretched back through her own life and forward into an unknown future. Rosie came up beside her, watching the young man through the serving window. Here we go again, she said, but she was smiling. Here we go again, Elena agreed. She brought the plate to the booth, set it down in front of the young man, and watched as he stared at the food like it was a miracle. Take your time. Eat as much as you want. Thank you, he whispered. You don't know what this means. I think I do. As Elena returned to the counter, she glanced at the postcard on the bulletin board. Marco had said that remembering someone believed he was worth saving would matter on hard days. Elena understood that now in a deeper way. It wasn't just about helping someone in the moment. It was about creating ripples, about passing forward the kindness that had been shown to you, about building a world where compassion mattered more than judgment. The morning sunshine streamed through the diner's windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Outside, Chicago continued its endless rhythm. People rushing to work, buses running their routes, construction crews building and rebuilding, life moving forward, one day at a time. Inside the diner, a young man ate a warm meal and felt hope for the first time in days. A waitress cleaned tables and thought about redemption and second chances. An older woman cooked in the kitchen and smiled at the goodness still possible in the world. And somewhere in a city far away, a man who used to be Marco Castellano worked a construction site, building things with honest labor, carrying with him the memory of a cold November night when someone had whispered, "Come in, dinner's still warm." The story that had begun with an act of compassion in an alley had transformed into something larger, a reminder that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment, that kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see, and that sometimes the most radical thing we can do is look at someone who's fallen and offer them a hand up instead of judgment. Elena wiped down the counter, served coffee to arriving customers, and felt at peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. She would continue to do what she could, help who she could, and believe in the possibility of change, because dinner was still warm, and it always would be.